Welcome to Upswing Poker Level Up, the show that helps you get better at poker fast. My name is Mike Brady, and I've got Scottish Cash Game Pro and coach Gary Blackwood on the line to talk about how to approach 3-betting, aka re-raising before the flop.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Very happy to be here covering a very important topic. Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about when to 3-bet over an open raise, how to decide which hands to 3-bet for value, and reveal the hands that are the best 3-bet bluff candidates. We'll also get into the nitty-gritty of 3-bet sizing and discuss critical factors that should impact your 3-bet strategy. Let's start with something simple but important. Why is it important to have a well-thought-out 3-bet strategy?
Well, I think that's a great question to start with, and there are two really important reasons for us to have a solid 3-bet strategy. The first one is that 3-betting used to happen a whole lot less than it does now. People used to play so many flats compared to how they play now, and now many great players play 3-bet or fold from so many different positions. It's just so much more common and therefore a very important part of the game. Secondly, given how common it is these days, you can bet that your opponents will have a really solid 3-bet strategy themselves, so it's really important that ours are up to scratch as well.
Yeah, not every opponent. If you're playing low stakes live micro stakes online, maybe some of your opponents don't know what they're doing, might have unreasonable 3-bet strategies, should maybe listen to this podcast, but Gary is right. Most players out there who, are thinking players are going to have solid 3-bet strategies these days. The first step to building a 3-betting range is to consider which hands you want to 3-bet for value. So, Gary, how do you decide which hands are good enough to 3-bet for value pre-flop?
Well, it varies by position and also which position our opponent has opened from. For example, if under the gun opens and we're under the gun +1, our value range is much narrower because our opponent has opened from under the gun and therefore has a tighter range themselves. But if the cutoff opens, we get to really widen that value range up. A perfect example is that some pre-flop charts will have you folding ace-queen offsuit a little bit and folding ace-8 suited pure MP versus under the gun. But when the cutoff opens, we've got ace-jack and ace-10 offsuit in our range, along with all the suited ace-x and some other hands in there as well.
So you touched on there how position should impact your value 3-bet threshold, but how does the open size impact it?
So this is a really good question, and it's really important that we don't have just one 3-bet size. Generally, we want to go 3 times our opponent's raise size when we're in position and 4 times when we're out of position. However, people have gotten pretty smart these days. They know that when they open from under the gun and MP, they're going to play a pot out of position very often, and therefore they use a smaller opening size to counter this. So if our opponent uses a standard 2.5x open size, then just 3-betting to 3 times that raise size is fine. But if somebody opens to 2.2x or even a min raise, they're doing this to keep the pot small out of position. So if we only 3-bet to 3 times that raise, we're allowing them to exploit us. So versus those smaller opens, I tend to size up slightly, go around 3.5 times to stop that happening. In terms of the range, unless it's a really big open or a really crazy player that's opening, I think our range should stay the same, whether it's a min open, 2.5 times or 3 times.
All right, now that we have the value range nailed down, let's talk about balancing that value range with bluffs. First of all, why is it important to include some bluffs in your 3-bet range?
Well, I think the answer lies in the question. We need to be balanced. If our range is just value only, we're not 3-betting anywhere near wide enough, and as a result, we're costing ourselves a lot of EV. Say we 3-bet cutoff versus MP, and the flop comes down king 6 deuce rainbow. We just get to bet our entire range there, and our opponent folds so much. So if we've got value only, we're missing out on all these spots where we easily just c-bet and win the pot because our range isn't wide enough. There are also things like board coverage. So if we don't have the 6-5 suited in our 3-bet range, big blind versus MP, for example, when the flop comes down 7-4-3 or 6-5 deuce, our range is really struggling. And lastly, we just become really exploitable if our opponent knows that we don't have any bluffs and are very, very value heavy. It's really good for your image to show down 9 high in a 3-bet pot sometimes.
What types of hands make the best 3-bet bluffs?
So let's talk about the big blind last. We 3-bet a different range from the big blind, but all the other positions really favor high cards, suited ace-x, suited double Broadway. Even versus late position, we have some unsuited double Broadway in our range. All those mergey type hands, which are kind of on the line between being a value bet and a bluff. We also throw in some low suited connectors at a small-ish frequency, and we immediately have a very solid, pretty wide 3-bet range. Hands that should not be in there are hands like pocket threes, king 10 offsuit, ace 9 offsuit, and definitely no suited gappers like 6-4 suited, 9-7 suited, jack 8 suited. These are disaster 3-bets, and we should always be folding these hands pre-flop. On to the big blind now, and this is where we see some really funky hands, especially versus the small blind and versus the button. we'll have all the hands that we've just mentioned, but we've also got some queen 8 suited, jack 7 suited hands versus the button. And then versus the small blind, we have such a crazy wide range, including hands like king 8 offsuit, ace deuce offsuit, 10 deuce suited, and so on. I just want to quickly say that big blind versus small blind, we 3-bet so many hands like this, and it's so important that we find these 3-bets. And that's because we get to deny so much equity from better hands that have to simply fold versus that 3-bet. If you look at king 6 offsuit, for example, say the small blind opens and we 3-bet the big blind with king 6 offsuit, we fold out all the better king X like king 10, king 9, king 7 suited, and so many hands like ace 4, ace 8 offsuit, all those better hands. And if our opponent does peel our 3-bet, we're playing a 3-bet pot in position, which is actually a very profitable situation for us.
All right, so we've covered value 3-bets generally, we've covered bluff 3-bets generally, and later on in this episode, I want to kind of do an example range where we talk about the specific hands we would 3-bet in a specific positional matchup. But before we get into that, I want to clarify one thing. So you had talked a little bit about 3-bet sizing earlier, going about 3 times the original raise in position and 4 times the original raise out of position. But there's one position that's very special and actually requires a little bit of an adjustment in 3-bet sizing. Can you talk about what that position is and what size to use, Gary?
Yeah, absolutely. We've just spoken about our big blind 3-bet strategy. The big blind is the only position where we're really quite polarized. So when we're out of position, from the big blind versus the button, we've got hands like jack 7 suited and queen 8 suited. We don't have those types of hands from the small blind, and therefore we're a little more polarized. And I like my sizing scheme to reflect this. I generally go 4.5x, just to allow my sizing to reflect the fact that I'm polarized and I've got some hands in there that I don't have when I'm in the small blind.
Yeah, a little fun fact for people. If you ever watch like those super high roller tournaments with some of the best players in the world battling with very deep stacks, you'll see 3-bet sizes out of the big blind upwards of 7 times, 8 times the original raise because they're just really trying to pump up the pot with a very polarized range. Always interesting to see that. But yeah, generally speaking, if you're playing 100 BB cash, like Gary said, 4.5x, 5x, the original raise is going to do just fine. So continuing our discussion on 3-bet sizing, how does stack depth change the optimal size? Are you adjusting your size when stacks get deeper or when stacks get shorter?
It's really simple to adjust to different stack sizes because obviously not everyone plays 100 big blinds deep all the time. If you're playing against a shorter stack, you want to just go a little smaller with your 3-bet size to allow for a little more playability post-flop. And on the flip side, when you're playing a little deeper, you just want to size up ever so slightly to account for those deeper stacks.
Yeah, and if you want some related reading on that topic, go ahead and Google stack to pot ratio. You'll find an article on Upswing Poker that covers that concept quite in depth, and it's kind of the key concept behind why you want to increase your 3-bet size when you're deeper. There's one other thing I want to add there too. If you watch the Doug Polk versus Daniel Negreanu Heads Up Challenge, you may have noticed Doug was actually decreasing his 3-bet size when he was out of position as stacks got deeper, and he increased all of his raise sizes when he was in position. I think this is a Heads Up exclusive concept because the best 6-max players in the world don't do that, but a lot of the best Heads Up players in the world do. The very interesting and nerdy reason behind it: when stacks get deeper, the value of position goes up. So by making the 3-bet size smaller out of position, your opponent is winning more of a smaller pot. Now again, that's pretty esoteric stuff. If you don't play Heads Up, it's kind of totally irrelevant to you, but it's something I just wanted to throw out there. All right, I want to flesh out in position versus out of position play a little bit more. So Gary, can you speak to in position versus out of position 3-bet sizing and ranges a little bit more?
So our range that 3-bets is quite similar, to be honest, whether we're in position or out of position. And the difference is that we use a larger 3-bet size out of position. Think about just how wide your opponent could peel if you used a 3x 3-bet size out of position. They would just continue their whole range with such a great price and the fact that they're in position. So we have to use that bigger size out of position. But like I say, the range that 3-bets is really quite similar, and the fundamentals of a tighter range versus an EP open and a wider range versus a later position open, they still stay the same.
Let's talk about some specific ranges. Let's take the small blind, for example. Gary, can you talk about the type of range that you would 3-bet from the small blind versus an early position raise, and then compare that to the range you'd 3-bet from the small blind versus a button raise?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the advanced solver ranges from the Upswing Poker Lab to compare these two spots. And say EP opens, our range is really quite narrow here. When we 3-bet from the small blind, we've got pocket 8s and above, all the suited broadways, and some ace queen and ace 5 suited. That's such a narrow range. And if we compare that to small blind versus button, where we've got way more suited ace-x, king-jack offsuit, 10-8 suited, pocket fives, it's just so much wider. And it's important that we understand why. Under the gun's opening range is tight, and our range has got to be tight as a result. But when the button opens, their range is really wide, and our range can get much, much wider as a result. The exact same logic applies to in position. The wider the opening range, the wider our 3-betting range becomes. We should also try and play a strategy that involves no flats in the cutoff or in middle position. And there are two huge reasons for this. Firstly, if we flat, we kind of cap ourselves to never having hands like aces, kings, ace, king, and then the players behind can just make our lives a misery by squeezing relentlessly, and we just end up out of position with a weak range so often and bleeding money on the flop. Secondly, the rake. The rake is really high, higher than some of us might realize. And if we're flatting too much, then the rake starts to eat away at our win rate. But if we 3-bet correctly, it has much less of an impact on our results. So let's be sure we're not flatting in the cutoff, in MP, or in the small blind, and we're playing a 3-better fold strategy from all of these positions.
Yeah, playing a 3-better fold strategy from the small blind, I think that's something that a lot of players have been doing for a long time, but it's a little bit more of a modern approach to also play 3-bet or fold from those other positions like the cutoff, like middle position, early position if you're playing a 9-handed game. And Gary touched on the reasons why you do that. The rake really makes your calls suffer, and there's the potential that you will face a squeeze behind, which puts you in a really, really tough spot. And lastly, of course, your range is really capped. When you call a raise from the cutoff, it's pretty clear the types of hands you're going to have. You're going to have pocket pairs, you're going to have some double Broadway hands, maybe like a Jack-10 suited, maybe some offsuit aces like an Ace-Jack offsuit, Ace-Queen offsuit. It's just kind of obvious for your opponent which boards are going to connect with that range. It's going to prevent them from paying you off when you hit a strong hand. It's going to allow them to bluff you effectively. It's just a situation you can avoid by playing 3-bet or fold. Now that said, there are situations that make sense to call. Really obvious one in tournaments or in any situation where there's an ante, it makes a lot more sense to start having a calling range because that price that you're getting is so much better pre-flop. Additionally, if you have some really weak players behind, or maybe the player that raised is very weak, and in addition you have weak players behind, you can start to consider mixing in some calls, because in those situations, you want to take advantage of the player who raised if they're a bad player, and you're not really worried about the players behind squeezing you out of the pot because, well, they're not going to do it very often. So there are some situations that you can keep your eye out for to start having some calls, but generally speaking, as a default strategy, you're going to want to play that 3-bet or fold approach. It's also going to be a lot easier for you to play post-flop because when you 3-bet, your range is going to be a lot stronger. It's a more simplified approach. It really just makes a lot of sense. One last note, a lot of poker players really suck at playing against 3-bets and playing 3-bet pots. They get scared, they get timid, sometimes certain guys get spewy. You get to take advantage of that by 3-betting more often. All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this short episode, but I want to wrap it up with a quick example, and it's going to be a little bit of a quiz too. So suppose you're in a 2-5 cash game, your opponent in the hijack raises to $15, you're in the cutoff, one seat to his left. What hands are you going to be 3-betting there if you're playing a 3-bet or fold strategy that has no calls? Pause the podcast really quick, consider what hands you'd 3-bet, and then Gary will reveal the answer when you unpause.
So let's start with our pocket pairs. We've got 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, and aces. We've got all of our suited broadways, jack 10, queen 10, etc. We've even got king queen offsuit, ace queen offsuit, ace 5 and ace 4 suited, as well as ace 9 suited. And then we've got ace jack offsuit, and then sometimes, rather infrequently, we've got 7 6, 6 5, and 5 4 suited. Really important we find these, but not too often, because obviously we need that board coverage. As mentioned earlier in the podcast, if the board comes down 6 5 deuce, you're just struggling on a board like that if you don't have these suited connectors from time to time.
Yeah, and Gary, I believe you were reading right off the advanced solver ranges right there.
That's right. Really fantastic tool that all the Upswing members have. The advanced solver ranges are fantastic. I strongly recommend them.
Yeah, so if you want to get access to the advanced solver ranges, all you have to do is sign up for the Upswing Lab training course on upswingpoker.com. You don't just get the ranges too. You also get 85 plus lessons that each cover a crucial strategy topic, hundreds of plain explained videos in which the coaches demonstrate a winning strategy, and access to a community where you can ask questions, get answers, and participate in discussions that will help you improve your skills. Keep in mind you can cancel anytime. You're not locked into a contract or anything like that. We hate contracts and would never impose them on our members. Anyway, thanks very much for listening to the 3-betting episode of the Upswing Poker Level Up podcast. We'll see you next time.
Take care, guys. See you next time.